All right, so this is going to be a quick video. I feel awkward. I never know if I want to look at the cam, if I don't want to look at the cam, if I want to, look off to the side. I'm not sure, but I'll just talk and jump around. So this is basically a quick video. All I want to do is record something super quick for, anyone who's wanting to play healer in War Within. I think the War Within is going to be a really, really fun expansion for healers. There's a lot of fun class design with the implementation of hero talents. And overall, I would say that every healer right now, I truly do enjoy, even if they aren't the best, even if they aren't performing as well as, the top dogs like Evoker or Disc or Shaman. I still think all the healers are genuinely fun to play. So this video is basically going to be me doing a quick overview, slight breakdown on what I think are the best healers going into the first season. So the War Within Season 1 starts on September 10th. And I just want to kind of talk about what I think is going to be the best healer, the healers I think are going to perform well, and my thoughts overall on them. That's pretty much it. So without further ado, we'll start off with the best healer. Evoker right now, we saw with Dragonflight how powerful they could be. They're very, I don't want to say all in, but they're kind of just a healer that's in the fight. So, to kind of make up for the fact that they're always in the fight, they have to have strong healing, they have to be tanky, they have to have good defensives. And that's kind of how Evoker is right now. Evoker is, with the addition of their hero talents, these talents right here with Chrono Warden, I would say all of these talents are ridiculous. So, we have a tier set being added in, we have extra CDR being added in, we have a hot from Spirit Bloom, which was another tier set, we have a haste buff as well going into your hero talents. And all of these things combined with the spells they already have. So their high damage, their burst damage, their high HPS, their high burst healing, their CC, their defensives, their passive tankiness because they have high armor on Evoker. They have very short cooldowns with time dilation. Their wall, their obsidian scales, that's a short cooldown. They have 2 charges of it. Their renewing blaze is a short cooldown. So I would say right now it's pretty simple to just put everything in terms of Evoker strengths. They don't really have a weakness in my opinion. They do have the low range, so to speak, so 30-yard range for Preservation Evoker, but at the end of the day, it's not that difficult. I think to get in range and get out of range on Dragon, you have a blink now with the new talents as well, so you got a nifty little blink here when you play the Chrono Warden talent. You can blink around and with your hover instead of kind of the charge forward. So Evoker right now, I can't really see anything that would be its downside. The biggest one would be either the range or when people talk about how they can be CC'd a lot. But you have to remember a lot of the class design with DPS in the game right now have a lot of cleave. They have a lot of passive AoE spells in their rotation, in their design. So being on top of the fight, you get CC'd kind of, but same as other healers, that's always going to kind of happen if you're kind of in the fight. Nullifying Shroud's always been a good spell at preventing getting CC'd, so that's another perk to Evoker. You have a spell that kind of makes you immune to crowd control, so that makes up for the weakness of being in the fight. So I would say overall, Evoker doesn't really have anything bad about it. It's kind of just good everywhere. It's very, very well rounded. You could argue here and there about things being overtuned and whatnot, but at the end of the day, it's a very, very well-rounded healer. It's good at every single aspect of PvP, and I think that's why it's kind of the top healer at the moment. And that's not to say that it's unbeatable, that's not to say that you can't find a way to do well into Evokers, but I would say without a doubt amongst majority of players, and personally I would say it is the best healer at the moment. Moving on to Discipline Priest, I think Discipline Priest has very, you can see I wrote down simple healing and strong CDs. What I mean by simple healing is they don't rely on hots, they don't rely on buffs the way Druid does. They don't rely on casting. They don't rely on keeping up certain spells. You're healing on Discipline Priest right now. You have a little bit of atonement healing. Sometimes you can penance defensively as well. You can put up Renew, which is a very, very small amount, just to kind of give more CDR on your shield if you need to get another shield immediately. But your healing is very much pushed towards pressing shields. So your healing on Discipline Priest is Power Shield, you have some Atonement healing, and you have Radiance for kind of your burst, and then you weave in cooldowns with Pain Suppression. You weave in your barrier for more damage reduction, your rapture shields. But a lot of Discipline Priest healing is kind of hard to stop in terms of their general throughput. You're spamming shields, you have Radiance, you have Atoma healing with Dot, and if you're able to get offensive penances. So your healing, when I say simple, it's not something that you can kind of take advantage of for most classes. You can't purge them really. You can't try and swap targets necessarily for who has buffs and who doesn't. Outside of pain suppression, of course, when it comes to damage reduction. They just have very easy healing that they're not really capable of stopping unless, which is what I get to into my next line with their weaknesses, unless you're kind of jumping on top of them and spam CCing them as much as you can. So basically, I think the weakness of Displace right now is when people collapse on them, it's a lot harder to put out that high HPS that we've seen so far in War Within, whether it's when in the beta, in Battlegrounds, when it comes to people already doing skirmishes, you know, in pre-patch and kind of the expansion drop right now. So I would say the biggest problem with Disc Priest, even though they have strong healing, they have pretty simple healing. It's very easy to do. It's very effective. They have solid cooldowns as well. The same damage reduction cooldowns we've seen for years now with their Rapture, with their pain suppression, with their barrier. So they have a lot of strong cooldowns. They have high HPS. And one of the nice things about War Within so far that we've seen is that Discipline Priest doesn't really run out of mana. So that's always kind of been a struggle of theirs, is they've always ran out of mana faster than every other healer for the most part. It's been a very common trend for them season to season. And I would say right now, Discipline Priest has extremely good mana. So one of their biggest weaknesses no longer seems to be as much of a factor, which is another reason why I think right now they're probably the second best healer, with their only weakness, in my opinion, being somewhat easy to CC. And I think if you really collapse on top of a Discipline Priest, the same way you would a Resto Shaman, you know, Mistweaver Monks, if you're kind of on top of them, you have micro CC, so you have a lot of micro crowd control, you have interrupts coming in, you have, you know, non-stop knockbacks on their casts, kind of things to slow them down from getting the same rinse and repeat rotation of pressing shield. That's when it becomes hard for them. So if they're kind of in the back, same way you would see a Resto Druid or a Monk healing, it's very easy. If you're not chain CCing them or having a lot of disruption, it's still very easy for Priest. But I feel like the minute you kind of collapse on their team, that's when it's a lot harder, because they don't have any HOTS compared to other healers. They don't have kind of high passive healing or healing or high HPS during, you know, crowd control moments. They don't really have that. You know, you look at something like a Resto Druid, where if they get CC but they have a lot of HOTS out, you kind of have room to breathe. If you look at something like a Resto Shaman, where if you're CCing the Shaman, you get crowd control on the Shaman, but he has an Earthen Totem out, he's got Earth Shield, you have Riptide, you have Healing Totems healing, then obviously the CC's good. It's a big deal to have crowd control, but it's not nearly as scary for them as it would be a Discipline Priest, where, similar to something like a Holy Paladin, once you're CC'd, no healing left, unless you got a good shield, unless you had a large shield before with your Rapture, or you got a pain suppression before. There's really you don't really have that healing or that kind of safety net of slowing down the damage or slowing down the pace during that crowd control. So I would say that's probably their biggest weakness at the moment. But one of their biggest weaknesses with mana, like we've talked about for expansions and expansions and seasons. I'm sorry, Disc Priest players. I know you don't want to go anymore. I understand. But that's something you don't really have to worry about this time around, which is great. And with all that being said, I would definitely put Disc Priest at number 2. And those are kind of my reasons why. Moving on to Resto Shaman. We all know I love Shaman. We all know I try really, really, really hard. Despite what people say, I know there's a lot of people that are like, oh, this guy always lies about it, or he's trying to act like they're not good. I always try so hard to be objective and be honest with my thoughts, and kind of not take only my personal feelings towards it, or have any sort of anecdotal take on it. I try to be as honest and objective as possible. So With that being said, Shaman I think is very clearly number 3. I think right now, clearly number 3 healer. I would say as well that it kind of depends on the meta too, because I really think if the arena meta still has a lot of melee, which it very well might. I think DKs are very powerful right now. Arms warriors and Fury warrior especially are very powerful. If cleaves and melee are strong, there is a chance Shaman could be worse, but overall I would say definite number 3. And for all we know, and for what I think, if there is a arena meta with more casters, I think Shaman could easily slide above Disc Priest just because of the fact that they have such strong utility. They've had such strong utility forever. Since the class has been invented, that's always been a perk of theirs. And if the meta does kind of favor more casters or the melee caster style compositions, then I think Shaman could easily be number 2 and be a very, very solid, strong healer that can compete with Evoker. I think right now they're extremely powerful. I think the utilities there, you know, despite the nerf with static field totem, I think they still have strong utility. You still have an interrupt, you still have grounding totem, you still have static field, even though it's got a slight nerf on the cooldown of it. Still have static field, you still have tremor totem, you still have thunderstorm, you have lightning lasso. So Shaman utility is crazy. You have earth grab totem, you have a lot of utility just like always. I think another big thing about Shaman too is we've seen over the years, and we've seen even when we've gone back to, you know, classic expansions, instant healing is how the game, it's kind of how PvP, especially when it comes to healers, that's how they're going to shine. You know, you can see when it comes to hybrids and DPS, if they're healing, if they're casting healing, depending on how strong it is, it's obviously going to be a good thing. We've seen before, the Elemental Shaman, the Enhanced Shaman can get a lot of casted healing out. The Balanced Druid can get a lot of casted healing out. The Shatter Priest and their team is okay, and they can kind of help with their hybrid healing. But when it comes to healers specifically, casting is normally bad. We see it in Classic. We see it now. We see it with retail and past expansions. It's always going to be better if things revolve around instant healing in terms of healers being powerful. Is it better for the game? That's a different question. We don't have time for that. But is it better for the healer in the meta? Does it make them stronger? Yes. Instant healing is always going to be like that. Shamans have a ton of instant healing. You have, right now, I would say the Farseer talent tree, which is a hero talent tree for Resto Shaman and I believe Ellie Shaman, that you basically summon ancestors, summon NPCs, they call them ancestors, that have additional healing, and they cast their own healing spells whenever you cast a healing spell or you cast a totem. So you cast a healing totem. So Shamans have a ton of instant healing. They've had this design for quite a while now. They still have Earthen Totem. They have a lot of disruption. I would say their HPS right now is very, very high against certain things when you're able to fight these caster comps, and even fighting certain melee. I think your HPS is high. Your HPS seems to be a bit low when you're fighting, you know, Death Knights, when you're fighting warriors, when you're fighting melee that are killing your totems constantly. You're looking at Windwalker monks. That's when you're going to struggle. That's kind of how Shaman's been. This isn't really anything new. This has kind of been the story of the class for pretty much always in WoW. So I would say certain classes, certain melee specifically, when it comes to Fury Warrior, Arms Warrior, you know, Death Knight even, Windwalker Monk, the classes that can kill totems a lot, those melee that can kind of be disruptive on the Shaman, stick to them, kill totems, that's going to be when your healing is not going to feel as good. But even with that, Shaman has a lot of tools this expansion, with Gust of Wind being brought back, with Stone Bulwark Totem. You have a lot of tools to kind of bypass those problems. And the biggest issue Shaman is going to have, if they do have a weakness, is pretty much the same. Just melee. Melee are going to be hard. Melee cleaves are going to be hard. Death Knights gripping you in, you know, you get gripped in, your teammates get gripped in, you get the big AoE go on your team, they're killing your totems. If they have a dragon on the other team, it's even worse. So that would probably be their biggest weakness. I feel like the term weakness is used kind of loosely, I would say, in general for this list, because when I look at Shaman, I do think melee are going to be harder, but I don't think it's an automatic loss. A lot of people, they fight melee, you know, me included, and it's always rough. You're frustrated about it. But if I had to pick a weakness, like I said, that would probably be it for Shaman right now. But I do think overall that the pros outweigh the cons, and I think Shaman's going to be very solid this expansion, on top of just being a lot of fun. You have the Farseer talent tree, you have the Totemic talent tree as well, with a lot of healing, a lot of AoE healing, and then the Acid Rain talents to kind of add a little bit of extra damage. So Shaman right now, I would say very, very solid. These weaknesses are kind of true because I think that melee are always going to be a problem, but I would say overall Shaman is going to be extremely strong and definitely be battling for the number 2 spot, in my opinion, behind Evoker. Moving on to Rest of Druid. Rest of Druid, we saw, took over the game in the beta, took over in the pre-patch for the War Within. They had a lot of damage buffs. The tuning on it was really crazy. People thought, oh, maybe it's just pre-patch. We log on the beta, we see that Druids are crazy powerful with passive damage, with their Moonfire, with pressing their Wrath, on top of having insane healing. Eventually, they got a bunch of nerfs to their healing. They got a Mastery nerf. They got a nerf to all their damage. So now we've kind of seen them tune down, and I would rank them probably below Shaman. The biggest problem with Druid right now, you know, as you can see written down, they have very high HPS like always. They're very good at staying in the back and having max range healing. They have a lot of instant healing, basically all instant healing. You know, there are some moments you're going to cast regrowth, but for the most part, when you're on a Resto Druid, outside of hard casting regrowth behind a pillar, or when you're in a safe space to kind of put up regrowth on your teammates, 95% of your healing is instant, which is great. You know, it's similar to Shaman. Disc Priest is similar. It's similar to Holy Priest. Yeah, I guess those 4: Shaman, Druid, Discipline Priest, Holy Priest. Instant healing is king. This is kind of how the game is. And for Resto Druid, I think that's something they've always been very strong at. They still have Cyclone, even though it's hard to get off. They still have that potential to get CC, but they're very, very strong in the last several expansions with, and in general, we've seen this when we go back to Classic as well. They're good at healing. They are very good at high HPS, range healing. They have a lot of instants. It's kind of hard to stop in terms of them getting their healing up, getting their healing spells up. But as you can see in the weaknesses, dragons are going to be so brutal for Resto Druids. So I think right now, if we're looking at healers individually, Druid would probably be, for me, number 4 under Shaman. I don't necessarily think they're that close because of the fact that dragons are so powerful. I think Preservation is the best healer. I think Devastation is a very, very strong caster DPS. Augmentation Evoker, I think, is one of these sleeper OP classes as well. So right now, dragons, all 3 specs are effectively extremely strong. So that's something where Resto Druids right now, they've always kind of had a problem with purges. Some seasons and some expansions more than others. Purges have been something that they're going to struggle with, especially if you're able to get offensive dispels consistently. If you're able to get purges, offensive dispels on a consistent basis against the Resto Druid, that's going to make their life hell. So with that being said, dragons and the Fire Breath Purge, whether it's a Tip the Scales Fire Breath Purge, whether it's a hard casted Fire Breath Purge, that is something, that is a tool, that is a mechanic that is extremely difficult for Druid to get through. And I would say it's easily their number 1 weakness. And if dragons are as powerful, all 3 specs across the board, as they might be, or as people are kind of expecting them to be, Druid very well could fall off the list that we have here and be lower on the totem pole of healers. They could go from number 4, which is what I think they're at right now, to a 5 or a 6. We don't even know. It's hard to put a number on it, let's be honest. We kind of have to see how things play out, but I'm definitely worried for Resto Druids because of how powerful dragons are. I think that the biggest loss they had this expansion is the loss of Adaptive Swarm. So if you don't know, they had Adaptive Swarm. That was a spell introduced in Shadowlands from the Necrolord Covenant. That is a spell that increased their healing over time effects on the target by a small percentage, and the Adaptive Swarm had multiple stacks, so it had 3 stacks, and it would transfer at the end of its duration to the enemy, and it would leap back and forth with depending on the amount of stacks it had. So it would leap, and then at the end of that duration on the enemy, it would go back and transfer to an ally. And that spell, not only did it add a lot of healing increase for, you know, specific targets for Druid, but we saw in Dragonflight with a new build that people were playing where your Adaptive Swarm spread or had a higher chance to spread and kind of duplicate, we saw that it was very effective at stopping offensive dispels from the enemy team. And with the removal of that, that creates a lot of concern in my eyes for rest of druids when they're going to be up against a dragon, whether it's augmentation, whether it's a devastation evoker, or whether it's a preservation evoker. I think that druids are going to struggle even harder than they did in Dragonflight against these evokers because of the fire breath, because of the fact that they no longer have adaptive swarm, which helped them a lot with having extra buffs to kind of protect their rejuve, protect their life bloom. So overall, Druid's pretty simple for me to rank, but I do think that they could be a lot worse depending on how dragons are going to be, how evokers are going to be. Druid is good at the same things it's kind of always been good at, and the weaknesses it has are going to be magnified with how strong evoker is going to be. So definitely huge concern for them. Moving on to Holy Priest, I think that Holy Priest, if anyone has been keeping up with the changes, they received a 65% buff to Prayer of Mending. So Holy Priest, Prayer of Mending has always been high in the Holy Priest breakdown. It's been a key spell for them in the last few expansions, and it's something that I think this buff is going to be huge. So, and, you know, anyone who's watched the stream or some of the YouTube videos lately, I have loved Archon Holy Priest. I'm not sure why exactly. I don't know. At first I looked at Archon and I thought it seemed a bit troll. It seemed kind of like a meme build, but after playing with it more, I really think Archon Holy Priest is not too bad. And after getting a huge buff to Prayer of Mending, I think Holy Priest will be even better. So right now, I think Holy Priest could easily be tied with the rest of Druid. You know, whether that's wishful thinking or me on the what do they call it, on the hopium, I definitely think Holy Priest is going to be pretty solid after those buffs. It'll be a slight healing increase overall, and I think that right now they're pretty solid with their cooldown. So you have about 20, it's about 18 seconds of your Spirit of Redeemer when you play Archon. Obviously, if you play Oracle, you're going to have, you know, different perks with that, with the premonition spells, with a passive power word shield every time you press Prayer of Mending. But as far as Archon goes, they have really, really strong 2-minute CDs with the 18-second or 17-second Spirit of the Redeemer, with Divine Hymn. They have a lot of healing with Halo. That helps a lot. When you play Oracle, I think it's very similar. You have a lot more sustain. You still have this 2-minute cooldown with Spirit, which is great for Holy Priest overall. That is a very powerful spell, as we've seen in Dragonflight. Really crazy that you can kind of pair up your 2-minute cooldown that makes you invulnerable. You can't be CC'd, interrupted. You don't take any damage. So Spirit of the Redeemer is a very powerful 2-minute CD. We've seen people, you know, play Holy Priest and kind of match it with certain cooldowns. For anyone who watched AWC, whether it was when Kearney's team, so Void GG, when they played their Boomkin Rogue Holy Priest, whether it was when our team ended up playing Boomkin Rogue Holy Priest against Liquid, you know, you see Kearney and myself on the Priest. If the Druid presses Incarn, if they press Incarnation, you press Spirit of the Redeemer, you kind of match that 2-minute cooldown. And now the Druid's biggest cooldown, the balanced Druid's biggest cooldown, is somewhat negated, and the damage is a lot lower. The pressure is a lot lower because of the fact that you're in spirit form. You're kind of matching it, and during their big setup, you're kind of in this position where you can obviously free cast healing. So Spirit of the Redeemer, huge cooldown for Holy Priest. Divine Hymn is also another huge cooldown with a lot of AoE healing. So those are, I think, obviously their biggest strengths. Having a stun is very good for Holy Priest as well. So I would say that having a ranged stun is always going to be crazy good, especially if you're a healer. You can kind of help set up for your team. You can kind of help be more disruptive. So having Chastise stun for Holy Priest is solid. That's another strength of theirs. Their weaknesses, I would say, is that their healing CDs are kind of long compared to some healers. A lot of healers have, you know, very high HPS while also having low cooldowns. So, you know, you can look at Resto Shaman. You can look at Resto Shaman with Earthen Wall Totem, which is a 1-minute cooldown. You can look at Evoker with their Time Dilation, which is a defensive of theirs being a 1-minute cooldown. You can look at Classes like Discipline Priest, where they have Rapture at 1.5 minutes. You have a 1 minute Guardian Spirit, which it's 3 minutes if they don't end up getting saved by the Guardian. If they don't proc the Guardian Spirit, then it turns into a 1 minute cooldown. Obviously, this is great, but their cooldowns overall are longer than other healers, assuming you're not getting the reset on Guardian Spirit. And on top of that, they don't really have any damage reduction. So a key part of PvP we've seen with healers and DPS is having damage reduction spells. Holy Priest doesn't have any. So, you look at Evoker. Evoker has a wall for themselves. They have time dilation, which isn't necessarily a damage reduction, but it slows down the damage. Kind of similar, but they have some sort of mitigation there. We see classes like Shaman that have a wall for themselves. We see they have Earth Shield, which gives a small amount of damage reduction as well on their target. We see Residue that has Iron Bark. Discipline Priest obviously is known for damage reduction. So having damage reduction is very, very powerful in PvP. Holy Priest doesn't really have that. And I would say that's been a weakness of theirs for a while. But overall, I think Holy Priest is, 1 or 2 buffs away from being a very, very solid healer and being very powerful in its own right. Definitely looking forward to it a lot. I think right now, if I did have to make a recommendation for something that's fun for anyone watching this video, Holy Priest would be up there. A little bit of bias there. I've just been having a lot of fun with it. But if you want a lot of fun, Archon Holy Priest is definitely an option for you. Otherwise, can't go wrong with a dragon. If you want to just play a healer, whether it's your first time, whether you're re-rolling, and you want something that's fun and we already know is fun and it's good, then just play a dragon. But if you want to play something else that's not dragon, I would say Holy Priest is a ton of fun right now, and definitely worth checking it out. Last 2 healers here, Mistweaver Monk and Holy Pally. So Mistweaver Monk, the strengths, I think they have strong cooldowns. I think Life Cocoon's very powerful. Life Cocoon also got a buff recently, so let's talk about the buffs real quick. Life Cocoon got a 30% buff in PvP. They did, however, nerf Revival and Restoral because they nerfed the Peace Weaver Honor talent, which gave a 50% cooldown reduction to Restoral and Revival. That is now going to be 33%, which means Restoral and Revival will be a 2-minute cooldown rather than a 90-second cooldown. And is this a nerf? Obviously. This is a pretty big change. In my opinion, I think that Mistweaver Monk is still going to be strong. On top of these 2 changes to Revival and Cocoon, they did end up making Enveloping Mist undispellable. So Enveloping Mist now for Mistweaver Monk is no longer dispellable. You can't purge it. You can't dispel magic. You can't Fire Breath purge it. So that, in my opinion, is a key change for Mistweaver. I think that does help them a bit. Mages are powerful right now. Priests are powerful. Shamans are powerful. Evokers are powerful. So I think that having their main healing, their main hot, their main heal over time, their buff be undispellable is huge. I think that overall the Revival nerf is huge for Battlegrounds. I think Arena, it's still a big deal. If you're going to get 30 seconds added to your cooldown, one of your best cooldowns, then that's obviously that's obviously cause for concern. But I think primarily for Battlegrounds, that's very scary. For Arena, I would say it's not as bad as people are thinking. Could I be wrong about this? Of course. I'll be the first person to admit I could be wrong. But I think the Cocoon buff, I think the Life Cocoon buff, and I think Enveloping no longer being dispellable are huge changes and huge buffs that, despite the nerf to Revival, I think help Monk a lot. So right now, Monk's strong cooldowns. They're a very mobile healer. However, they are a healer, and I think they're kind of the only healer right now that has to cast a lot. They've been a healer, the caster Mistweaver Monk. They've been a healer that has constantly had to open up their school, constantly trying to get casts and interrupts out, and juke interrupts while under pressure. And I think that's always kind of been a downfall of theirs. We saw them add we saw them add an instant Enveloping Mist whenever they used their Thunder Focus Tea. So that is a great addition that has helped them a lot. But Mistweaver kind of still has that problem of constantly opening up their school and constantly trying to get casts out. Even if it's for half a second when you're pressing Soothing Mist, you still have to kind of open up your tree, and you're susceptible to interrupts at that point. and it makes it difficult when people collapse on you, like we talked about with Disc Priest. Whenever people kind of collapse on the Monk, that's when it's very difficult. So I would say Monk right now is pretty squishy, and if people collapse on them, it hurts so much on their healing output. It's very difficult to kind of deal with all these interrupts, and that's something that I'm not sure they'll really change. And lastly, we've talked about this a bunch on my stream, on my channel. I think I've mentioned it a few times in some YouTube videos as well, but the damage. Mistweaver monks don't do any damage at all. And I'm talking about caster monk. So I will get into Fistweaver for a brief moment. I'll do it, I'll do it because I love you guys. So I will talk about Fistweaver a little bit. Caster Mistweaver does no damage. They don't do any damage. This has been a problem of theirs, in my opinion, for a very long time. They're kind of in this position where they are the sit back and PvE healer, but other healers are kind of capable of doing that better than them. So, you look at something like a Discipline Priest right now. Discipline Priest has kind of taken that playstyle, I would say, this expansion, where they are very much capable of sitting back and kind of doing their rotation and PvE healing, but they at least have a little bit of damage added onto that as well. And Mistweaver Monk doesn't have that. They're sitting back. They do have their Zen Spheres that they can apply to an enemy that gives us a small damage increase to them for their team. But overall, Mistweaver Monk doesn't really have... They don't have any damage, I would say, and they don't really have the... Because of the fact that they don't really have any damage, they don't have chances or opportunities to kind of apply pressure in that regard the way other healers can. So when your team is deciding to go all in, when you're collectively pushing in and you're trying to get CC, you're trying to attack the enemy and close out the game, Mistweaver, outside of their crowd control setup, they can't really do that. They don't have the same pressure that, a Shaman or a Dragon especially could kind of bring in that moment, in that scenario. So I would say that's a weakness of theirs. It's been that way for a long time. Now, with this being said, at the top, you can see, at the top of my notepad, you can see that BG Blitz is kind of included, in my opinion, on all these healers. I think that monks, they've been great in Battlegrounds forever. They've always been a very solid BG healer. So if you're listening to this and you are getting discouraged when it comes to playing monk, please remember that monk in Battlegrounds is always good. So in Arena, you may have a rough time, but with this new addition of Battleground Blitz for the War Within, I think that's going to be a very fun game mode. And I think that if you are a Mistweaver Monk player, if you are someone that does enjoy playing Mistweaver Monk, then BG Blitz is going to be great. Assuming you like playing Battlegrounds, or at least you're willing to check it out, I think that Mistweaver Monk is going to be solid in BG Blitz. They're definitely going to be a healer that a lot of people want. They've been in this position for a very long time, and there's still hope. So do not give up. Do not give up on the monk. I promise. If you want to try BG Blitz, or you already like Battlegrounds, then definitely play your monk. It's going to be very, very successful, and I wish you the best of luck. Before we move on to Holy Paladin, and then before the end of this video, I want to briefly touch on Fistweaver Monk. As some of you may know, I'm not the biggest fan of the fist weaving, but I will give an honest take on it. I think that right now, fist weaving doesn't seem to be too great. I think that you don't really have as many off stats, as many secondary stats as you would like. Fist weavers do really well with high haste because they are a healer that benefits from high APM and high global usage. So having low haste for fist weaver is definitely rough. They have some really solid changes when it comes to their design overall. They changed their mastery to work with their damage spells. They have a few talents in their hero talents that kind of help their fist weaving as well. So fist weaving, when you look at it overall, whether it's when it's in PvE as well, they are pretty solid. But I think right now in PvP, I think in Arena, maybe in Battlegrounds they'll be really good. It's always kind of rough to deal with fist weavers, especially in a Battleground scenario where you can't really... It'll probably be harder to crowd control them. They might die, though. They might get attacked a lot more. I'm not too sure, honestly. But when it comes to Arena specifically, if you are someone that's thinking about playing Fistweaver, I think you might be able to play similar things to Dragonflight. So, playing melee cleaves, playing... we've seen a couple people... Shout out Slunks. We've seen him play with a mage and a feral. I believe Melon has tried this as well, but mage feral was something that we saw Fistweaver monks playing towards the end of Dragonflight, and that composition kind of helped them out. I'm not sure if it would be as strong as something like a melee cleave, whether it's, you know, Ret Paladin with a warrior, whether it's warrior and Death Knight. I think you can probably end up playing those compositions on Fistweaver, but I'm not too sure how well they would do. I would say right now that they're not nearly as strong as I thought they were going to be. I think a lot of that kind of has to do with their secondary stats being low, but I would say they are still decent. So if you are someone that wants to try it, you can definitely give it a shot. I think you can definitely play solo shuffle still. I think you can definitely try to play the kind of similar comps to Dragonflight, but definitely worth checking out if you are someone that wants to try Fistweaver, because I don't think they would be too bad at the moment. Moving on to Holy Paladin, the last healer on our list. Right now, listening to me, I really don't know what their strengths are. I think their strengths normally kind of revolve around their cooldowns. So, you know, they have Blessing of Protection, they have Blessing of Sacrifice that you can use with the Honor talent that makes it a 100% damage transfer. They have, you know, Divine Shield for themselves. But right now, I would say the problem with Paladin is I have a hard time kind of seeing what they're good at. You know, they don't have any Dispel protection, so they have virtually no buffs. So if you play Paladin and you're playing the Herald of the Sun talent tree, I believe it is called, where you get Eternal Flame, then you have one buff with Eternal Flame. You have a buff with Blessing of Protection if you use it, or if you use your Blessing of Freedom. But Paladin doesn't. They don't have that Dispel protection that we saw in Season 3 of Dragonflight, with not only Glimmer, but with their Healing Over Time buff from their tier sets. So that's something that I think hurts Holy Paladin a lot, especially when Purge and offensive Dispel classes are very, very much present in the meta. So Priest, and I'm talking about classes that have heavy purges or spammable purge. Obviously classes like Hunter and Demon Hunter have a purge, but I'm mainly talking about, you know, Priest who can spam their offensive Dispel, Mage, Shaman with greater purge, or they can play normal purge, and then Dragon, you know, Evoker has their Fire Breath purge as well with a huge kind of burst damage and the Dispel on top of that is also AoE. So Paladins just kind of struggle in that environment where, you know, let's say someone's in trouble and you press Blessing of Protection. Well, before you know it, it's gone. You know, you press Blessing of Protection, it lasts half a second, and suddenly one of your best cooldowns, your 4-minute cooldown, is suddenly gone. And now you're still in trouble. So I would say that's an issue for them still. I'm not really sure how they could tweak that. I feel like they need some sort of cover for their cooldowns. I'm not sure if they need to add another buff to them, or, you know, add some sort of protection. It's hard to say because, you know, you don't want to add an immunity to that. So let's say you add an immunity to your Blessing of Protection, where now Blessing of Protection can't be dispelled for 3 seconds after you press it. It sounds good in theory, but I do think that kind of takes away a bit of counterplay and skill to the game. So I'm not too sure what the right approach is, but that is something that we have seen a lot recently, where Paladins kind of they don't have the protection they need for their cooldowns to be so strong. So if their best strength is their cooldowns, but their cooldowns aren't very strong, then what is their strength, you know? We saw Paladins early in the beta had crazy high HPS. Their healing throughput was ridiculous. They received a lot of nerfs, a lot of changes to that. And now their healing, you know, it's not bad. I don't think it's bad, but low compared to the other healers. I don't think Paladin really has great healing. It seems to kind of drop off a lot quicker than most of the healers right now. I also think that Paladin, we've seen in Dragonflight as well, they're kind of squishy. You know, they're a plate class. They're plate armor, but for the most part, they are kind of squishy. And, you know, that's something that we've seen kind of be one of their weaknesses also. They're kind of easily CC'd as well. I'm having a hard time saying something positive. I don't know. I'm trying people. I'm trying really hard. They're definitely viable. I really, really want to reiterate that. I don't think they're just unplayable or unviable as people try to claim about a lot of classes. I do think they're playable. You know, they are viable. You'll be able to play them in arena. You'll be able to find a composition for them. You'll be able to play solo shuffle and BG blitz. I do think that right now they are kind of struggling with the fact that, in my opinion, you know, when you look at them and my notepad and my list for them, and you see their strengths, which is none, and you look at the rest of the healers, it's very obvious what the problem is. The problem is, I don't think they're good at anything. So it's something where I think they definitely just kind of need a little bit of a nudge. A little bit of a nudge up the ladder, you know, whether it's a buff to their healing output, whether they reduce the cooldown of Blessing of Sacrifice again, because we did see that they ended up nerfing the cooldown of Blessing of Sacrifice to, I think it's a 2-minute cooldown baseline, but they have a talent that reduces the cooldown, which they had in Dragonflight as well. That talent used to be a 1-minute CD reduction, but I think now in PvP it's 15 seconds, which makes their Blessing of Sacrifice 1 minute and 45 seconds. So huge nerf to Pally this expansion, on top of all the other changes where, you know, they got a lot of nerfs to their healing, nerfs to their damage, and I think that's something that's missing. I think that, you know, a small buff to their healing would be good. I think that they could buff their damage again. You know what, even if it's Judgment, what's stopping Judgment from being a powerful spell again? You know, that's something that I think Pally is I think Pally's just in this position where they're just missing things. They're missing some sort of strength to the class. You know, you can look at other healers, you know, look at Shaman and think, wow, they have good utility. They're very disruptive. You can look at Priest and think, wow, they have pretty good healing. They have strong healing. It's not too difficult to do. They have strong damage reduction cooldowns. You can look at Dragon and think, wow, this healer is insane at everything. But when you look at Pally, I can't really think of anything that they're good at or very strong at right now. You know, that's kind of my thoughts on Pally. Those are my thoughts on all of the healers. Every healer is fun. I really, 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 really want to stress that. It's, you know, people think I'm lying. I don't know. But as someone who enjoys playing everything, has played everything, and especially, you know, the last several years, you're kind of forced to play everything for AWC and for tournaments. I enjoy every healer right now. Even classes like Mistweaver Monk, classes like Resto Druid that I haven't been too fond of in my history as a healer in WoW. I enjoy them. I still enjoy playing them. If they're not the greatest, it doesn't matter. I still enjoy playing them. I enjoyed Mistweaver Monk for the first time in years when Dragonflight came out. Paladin is very similar. You know, I've never really been too fond of Pally, but Pally's been a fun healer for me. I enjoyed it a lot in Dragonflight, and I think that it's fun right now. And, you know, with a couple buffs, could be even more fun, because obviously, you know, if a class is fun, great. But some of that fun is kind of going to be determined by whether it's strong or not. You know, you could have the most fun healer design-wise be absolutely terrible, and suddenly it's not so fun. That's not to say that healers need to be broken or be overpowered to be fun, but they having strengths is going to help your enjoyment in a healer. That's going to help you find that enjoyment and find that fun when playing a healer. So right now, once again, Evoker I would say is the best. Discipline Priest and Resto Shaman I would say are number 2 and 3. I think they could easily swap places, and Shaman could be number 2 because they are definitely good right now, definitely fun, and have a lot of potential. I think that the rest of the healers kind of fall in line with Resto Druid, Holy Priest, Mistweaver Monk are all pretty close to each other. Holy Pally, I would even argue, is, you know, by definition, it is close strength-wise, you know, their overall power and their value. But I do think right now they're just lacking something that makes them strong. They're lacking some sort of strength. And that's pretty much it. So appreciate you guys checking out the video. Hopefully this was informative and helped you a bunch. Make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next video or the next stream. Appreciate it. Much love, everybody.